Hello guys, and today I'm going to show you another chess match, and this is the ending of a chess match. Most of the ending of a chess match. And I'm going to ask this question. Should white have taken the rook? Now here, you'll notice that black moves the rook to threaten the white rook. Now on the surface this looks like a terrible blunder, because after white takes the rook, black cannot take the rook back. There is no way that black can take the rook back. But the question is this: was that move by black a blunder? Was black moving the rook a blunder? Or was it a trap? Did white do the right thing by taking the rook with their own rook? I'm going to give you 10 seconds to think. Then I'm going to show you the game, and you'll see the ending and find out whether you were right or not, and whether you were right in deciding in your decision of whether white should or should not have taken the rook. Right, I think there's about 10 seconds up. So now I will show the game from the beginning. Anna Kramling has recently done a game where, where she teaches people how to play d4 properly. So I thought I'd try it. You know, someone who did d4, I thought I would counter with d4. This is playing more properly, as rather than my usual pawn to king rook 4 moves. So far, just exchanging pawns. This is a fairly standard response to that, but I'm going to take the knight because they weren't expecting it. Sorry, I'll go back a bit. They've now moved their pawn to stop the check. They've now moved their knight to stop the check. I then are able to take their rook with my queen. For those learning, this is known as a 4-king check. Whereby I'm threatening the king and also threatening to take the rook afterwards, and there doesn't seem to be anything that white can do to stop it. Threaten the knight. Knight moves to safety. Now, you might think that looks like a very strange move, because on the one hand it is deceptive. If you're learning, it's deceptive. It looks as if the bishop could take my black bishop, but it can't, because of the pin on the king. So if I just a minute, if I because there's a pin, it cannot move. And I'm actually threatening with I believe, a checkmate in the future, where I'm threatening to move the queen to where the bishop is by taking the bishop with the queen, and then I believe that's a checkmate, and that's a possible checkmate for the future. They spotted it, and they moved their queen so to prevent the checkmate. I move a knight out. They've castled to avoid the checkmate. Now, I do a bishop trade, move the queen to safety, move the king out the way. They've taken a pawn. I take a pawn. This is actually a terrible blunder, and I lost my queen. This is a Botez gambit, guys, a genuine blunder. There's no strategy behind it, okay? Many people would just resign at this point because they've lost their queen down, but never give up, guys. Now I've taken a pawn, and they've pinned my knight. I take a pawn. Move the rook to safety. They then take my knight. It's really looking very bad for me here. I move up, check. Move the king out the way. They move their bishop. Check. I then move the knight out. For some reason, they've now blundered their queen. Because here, you'll notice I can take their queen. But they're also threatening my rook. Maybe they think my rook is a bigger threat than keeping their queen. Rather than worrying about that at the moment, I have moved the knight out the way, check. And now, you'll notice, I'm going to do something even stranger. I'm going to move the rook that's being threatened, the rook that's being threatened by this knight to safety. Check. Before then, you might have thought that I would take their queen in return for them taking my rook. But in fact, at this point, I get to keep both rooks for now. They then have to move their king out of the way. Now I take their queen because it's a threat. They then move their rook. I move my king here. This seems like a very strange move to make. But I do have a plan. They then move down to here. I think their aim is to take my knight. They're now threatening my knight. And if they take my knight, I cannot take it back because of the king. However, you may recognise the position now. This was the position we had at the beginning of the game. Now, most people when they play chess try to play based on what they think is the best move possible. But making the best move possible is not always the best strategy. What many people fail to understand is human psychology, also known as greed. And sometimes it's not about making the best move on the board, it's about making a move which you think will trick your opponent into doing a really, really bad move, even if the move you made wasn't technically the best move to make. What do I mean? Let's find out. Now, here is where I moved the rook. On the surface, this looks like a terrible blunder. In fact, it is a masterpiece. And if this was probably against a chess computer would probably ignore it, move the rook to safety, or do something else. But no, but because I was playing against a person, and people are generally greedy, they thought they were playing Monopoly, and they couldn't believe their luck. A rook which is not protected. A rook which is easy to take. A rook which, if you take it, cannot be took back. So, not surprisingly, they themselves made a terrible blunder and took my rook. This was a terrible blunder. And you might think, how is it a blunder? I mean, they can't take they can't take the rook. Black cannot take the rook. Where is the blunder? You'll also notice that white has got an extra bishop. White has an extra pawn. And it doesn't look particularly good. However, it was, as I said, a terrible blunder by white. Black now has mate in 1. I'm going to give you 10 seconds to see if you can find the mate in 1. Ready for this? Checkmate. Never underestimate the power of a pawn. Now, if we go back, now if white hadn't been so greedy, it could have now taken the knight black would have been forced to move here. There is no other legal move. And if white had wanted to do a rook exchange, no, it's not necessarily in their interest to do it. They could move there. Rook exchange, not a particularly good idea, but I don't think, but they could have done it if they'd wanted to. Or white could have threatened the bishop, and black can either move here or black could take the bishop. There were various options how the game could have ended, but nonetheless, and the game would effectively carry on. And white would now in theory be winning because white has more. But because at this point at the moment, black cannot, the king cannot go here because of this pawn protecting it. And now white would be up in terms of material. But as I said, because they were impatient and greedy, and they fell for the trap, that is why they lost the game. It's not always about making the best move, it is sometimes about exploiting people's greed and hoping your opponent makes a bad move through greed. Thanks for watching. Did you make the correct decision at the beginning? Did you correctly spot that white should not have taken the rook? I hope you did. Thanks for watching. Bye.